Lyle. I'm the Dean of the School of Professional and Extended Studies here at American University, for those of you who don't know me. This is an event that is part of a periodic series that we do, the SPECS Dean's Forum on Innovation in Professional Higher Education and Workforce Development. And I am particularly thrilled to welcome today a very old,
long time
friend who has kindly agreed to stop off on his way further south to come and spend some time with us. I met Arthur Levine, I think exactly 20 years ago, and we have a mutual friend, and they, in fact, were part of storming the barricades at SUNY Buffalo back in the day. And so as we think about unrest on university campuses today, Arthur probably has some good war stories to share with us as well on that. But I would like to just officially welcome Arthur Levine, who is the 6th president of the Woodrow Wilson Fellowship Foundation. Before his appointment at Woodrow Wilson, he was president and professor of education at Teachers College at Columbia University. He also has served as chair of the Higher Education Program, chair of the Institute for Educational Management, and senior lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He's previously served as president of Bradford College, which is where he was when I first met him, and has been a senior fellow at the Carnegie Foundation and the Carnegie Council for Policy Studies in Higher Education. Most recently, he has published on the future of the new generation, a generation on a tightrope, a portrait of today's college student with Diane Dean, which came out in 2012. He has widely published on education, teachers training, on the future of school leadership and educational leadership, and we are delighted to welcome Arthur here. Most recently, many of you may have seen the article in Inside Higher Ed and some of the controversies around how we might revamp teacher education, and we have colleagues here from our own School of Education who may have some thoughts on that. But mostly, we've asked Dr. Levine to speak more generally about the future of education and where we are heading. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you. It's wonderful to see somebody I've known for 30 years, not 20. You were in grade school when I met you. It is really nice to be with you. And you just changed my topic, but I find it more interesting than the topic I prepared. I was going to talk to you about teacher education, and we'll get to that. But let me do this. I'm only going to talk for a short while, but I promise it'll seem much longer. I got to tell you this one story just to give you truth in advertising. When I was still at Teachers College, I used to teach a course every other year, pretty much. And the last time I got back my course evaluations, I had one that said, if I had 20 minutes left to live, I would want to spend them in Arthur Levine's class. Because every minute with Arthur Levine feels like an hour. So let's do this. What I want to talk to you about today is, I want to talk to you about 6 forces that have the capacity to create major change in higher education, K-12 education, or in the area that I wrote about, which is teacher education for this speech. But let's talk about them. The first one is demographics. And you all know this. The reality is our population is changing color. It's moving. It's getting older. And it's coming from abroad. So that if you look at our population, it's moving west and south from cities to suburbs. Inner cities are more isolated. They're increasingly poor. Concentrations of kids of color. But what that movement is going to do is it's going to change the political map of the country. In the shorter run, what it's going to do is make red states more powerful as their numbers increase, and blue states less powerful because that's where populations are moving from. What's also going to happen is we're going to see large numbers of retirements. What we're going to see is, oh, that's a sign. They said they'd ring a bell when I was supposed to be finished. What we're also going to see is we're going to see more kids coming to schools who don't speak English, multiplication of languages in schools. We're going to see more kids with learning disabilities than we've ever seen before. And what that's going to add up to, in a very real sense, is that more affluent communities now are really testing their kids. So that in the community of Greenwich, Connecticut, over 20% of the kids have been diagnosed as learning disabled. Now, that doesn't seem credible. But what happens is their kids get extra services, they get extra time, they get extra everything. So we're moving toward a time in which every kid is going to get an individualized education program, or huger numbers are certainly. Let's talk about another factor that's changing. Economics. So we're shifting from a national analog industrial economy to a global digital information economy. And you all know the impact of that. Low-end jobs are disappearing. Jobs now require more education than they've ever required before. Higher levels of skills and knowledge than they've ever required before. And we're seeing states change standards to note that. We're also seeing greater pressure to increase graduation rates, access rates, and student success in schools. Once upon a time, dropout was something that was acceptable because there were jobs for dropouts. You get a good job and support a family if you were a dropout. Once upon a time, but not anymore. But maybe the more major change is this. Industrial societies are all about process. And the way we designed our schools, and they were very, very good and very, very successful. We designed them for an industrial age. And they look like the best piece of technology from that era. They look like assembly lines. We take kids age 5, we batch process them through 12 years of schooling. They take, for 180 days a year, taking classes for lengths of time dictated by the Carnegie Foundation in 1906. And what happens is we're saying in that model, all kids can learn the same thing in the same period of time. And what we're saying is what really matters is how long kids are exposed to teaching. It's seat time. Information economies are about something entirely different. What information economies are about is they only care about outcomes. Process is variable. Time is variable. And this may be the most revolutionary change we're dealing with in all the changes that are hitting us right now. And there are a gazillion of them. But this is a switch from teaching to learning. What do kids know? What can they do? What do people at universities know and what can they do? What's your job placement record look like? It's all about outcomes. And that's not going to change. That one I think is just going to keep going. And what it means for us is that, I can't wait to find out what it means for us. Hold on. Tell you what, we'll get to that. Let's talk about government for just a minute, okay? That's also another major force for change. And what's happening there is that right after World War II, there was a Truman Commission on Higher Education, 1947. And what it said is what we've been saying about all levels of schooling. But that one said, let's expand this thing. Let's radically expand higher education. God, we can send 50% of the population to what were then called junior colleges. And do you know what else? What we really need to do is hire more professors, build more colleges, and recruit more students. It was a real growth industry. Government asked no questions. They put the money on a stump and said, are you building? Are you growing? And what's happened in more recent years is that higher education has become a mature industry. You don't meet a lot of legislators now who are saying, let's say we have 71% of all high school grads going on to some form of post-secondary education within a year or two. They're not saying, that's a great number, let's get it up to 90. What happens when an industry becomes mature is we treat it differently. And that's what we're seeing now. What we ask is it effective? Is it efficient? Is it productive? What are the outcomes? How do we know it's doing those things? And every one of those questions is being asked of us in higher education right now. Every one of them. What we do with mature industries is we regulate them. We rationalize their funding. And we demand accountability of them. And those are things we're being pushed toward. And there's no reason they're really going to disappear. I watched an alarming conversation between 2 education governors and 3 presidents of research universities. And one of the governors was Tom Kean from New Jersey, who'd been a university president. And he said, the financial model of higher education is fundamentally broken. And Jim Hunt was the other governor from North Carolina, 4-term governor and education governor. And he said, you can't expect that whatever you choose to charge, people will be willing to pay. And the 3 presidents looked at them with shock on their faces, saying, you're really asking the wrong questions. The right question is not what we charge. The right question is who pays. And government ought to be paying a lot more. This was not the answer the 2 governors had necessarily been looking for. And there was this huge mismatch. And I think we're going to see increasing mismatches between government and higher education as higher education makes more and more demands upon it, as government makes more and more demands on higher education. More public than private, but private as well as public. Not clear what financial aid will be tied to in the long run, particularly the Republican Congress, particularly if a Republican president's elected next round. Technology. Technology is really the wild card. And textbooks are done. What we're going to do is we're going to create books that are designed for our individual classes. I just saw a browser. You tell them the topic, you tell them the nature of the students you have, and they give you a whole bunch of stuff to turn into your own textbook for your own students. What's also happening now is it's possible. Now, I was on an airplane, and this is sort of the backstory. And I'd finished all my work. And finished the book I brought. And I had the window seat, so I couldn't go up and get another book. So I read the airline magazine. And it talked about the travel agency of the future. And what it said is, they're going to take you there. It's going to be virtual reality. You'll be able to walk on the beach, be able to go into the restaurant, see the tiny hotel room that you actually got. You'll be able to see all those things. If we can do that with a travel agency, why can't we do that with a school, a university? Why can't we recreate 5th century Athens, America on the eve of the Declaration of Independence, 14th century Paris? And imagine, how does a stand-up lecture compare to be able to take a student to 14th century Paris, to be able to smell the smells, which must have been putrid. They didn't have sewer systems. See the buildings, talk to the people, do all those things. And I guess the other piece is, what's also possible now is, it's possible for a course to be offered here, for me to take that course in Princeton, and for somebody else to take that course in Beijing, and for all of us to feel like we're sitting in the same room. And for me to nudge my colleague in Beijing and say, I nodded off, I didn't hear what the professor said, can you tell me? Translated Chinese back into English, and I'm set. The professor can assign me and my colleague in Japan, China, to prepare a project for next week. I can have tea after class with my colleague from China. Here's the big question. Think about California for a second. California is expecting a tidal wave of 500,000 new students for higher education. They can't possibly accommodate them all in the University of California, Cal State, or the community college system. They're going to have to create a digital alternative. And if you look at the demographics of higher education, let's see, the traditional image of a college student, 18 to 22, full-time, living on campus, constitutes under 20% of all college students. That older group, they don't hang out on campus. They're part-time. They're showing up for classes for the most part. They don't go to events. They just come to classes. If they can get that online, they'll take it. They told us what they wanted out of college, a relationship like they have with their internet provider, the supermarket, their bank. What they want is convenience. Offer classes 24 hours a day, unless you can offer them more frequently. In-class parking would be really nice. In addition, what they want is service, great service. The registrar ought to be there to help you. The financial aid office ought to have more predictability than playing the lottery. They want low cost, and they want high quality. They want people who can really teach and are up to date in their fields. And given that, they don't want to pay for things they're not using. The piles of electives they're never going to take. The natatorium that they're never going to swim in. The clubs and speakers they're never going to go to. They don't want to pay for that. They're looking for a stripped-down version of higher ed. And they'll be prime candidates for those new kinds of programs. Bottom line, what all this is going to do is it's going to permit the individualization of higher education. We can gear what's happening to the individual student, particularly because we're learning so much from brain research right now and learning sciences. We can make this stuff adaptive. We can make it virtual. We can do simulations. We can make it interactive. And technology is going to do all of those things, I think. Another factor, privatization. Higher education is it really 10 to 2?
No.
Well, I was having a good time. I was wondering why so many of you were nodding off. Private sector is really interested in investing in higher education. And it's sort of a new bump. They're putting more and more money in right now. It's a new venture area. They had a venture time, and now they're venturing again. And the reason is, what venture people say is, we think this could be the next healthcare. That's not entirely reassuring, but that's what they're saying. And what they're saying is, here's an industry which is low in productivity, low in technology use, high in cost, and they have questions about the quality of what's being offered, certainly under criticism. And they're thinking, why not? We can do it more cheaply. And the other thing is, this is an amazing industry for the private sector. And the reason is that, one, we're a growth industry. We're going to keep growing. Second thing is, we are subsidized. Third thing is, we're counter-cyclical. And what that means is when the economy is bad in any of your other businesses, people come to college. So that's a great hedge. What's also true about us is people pay up front in a lump sum. It's not like selling milk, in which you have to sell it every day. And for them, they're thinking, they are licking their lips and thinking, I really want to do this. And I ought to tell you one quick story here. I went to visit a publisher, and I was sitting in his anteroom, and the walls were covered with books, and that's probably my biggest vice. And I was looking at all the books, and he came out, and he said, you know, we're not in the book business anymore. All right. And he said, we're in the knowledge business. And I think he saw me roll my eyes. And he said, let me give you an example. Subtext. Let me give you an example even you can understand. Okay? And he said, at the time I was president of Teachers College. And he said, you know, we're in 12,000 schools. Hold it. Yeah, we're in 12,000 schools, what he told me. And there's no university in the United States that has that kind of penetration, none. So that he now had my full attention. And I thought I still had an edge. I said, where are you getting your content from? Thinking he had to come to me. And he said, oh, we hire full-time content providers. And I thought about that for a moment. I don't have any friends who are full-time content providers. My parents didn't have any friends who were, none of my neighbors are ever full-time content providers. So I asked him, what's a full-time content provider? And he said, he described them to me, and I realized I just had a different name for them. I called them professors. Only he could give bonuses, and he could give stock options. And the faculty at Teachers College were too smart to take those things from me. So given that, I thought I had one more edge. And I asked him, what about credits and degrees? He said, we're still working on that. They're not working on it anymore. They got degree granting authority. And that's the other piece of the equation, which is we're seeing a convergence of all kinds of knowledge producers so that people, museums, libraries, media companies, software companies, think tanks, edX are all offering programs. And we're all offering the same kinds of programs. We're using the same medium to reach them. And we're offering increasingly things that look like courses. And the largest producer of professional development for teachers right now is PBS. The museum down the block from me is offering a doctorate in astrophysics. We're going to see more and more and more of that kind of thing as the years go on. So, what's it all mean? Beats me. What kinds of questions do you have? What's it all mean? And here's my take on it. One thing first. We haven't gone to hell in a handbasket. The whole world around us changed. It changed in all the ways that I talked about. And we were just doing what we've always done. We live in the present, and the future happens behind your back. And this is the future we're all now facing. But it's not only us. It's every social institution in this country. So you look at them all and you say, oh my, government's broken. It doesn't work as well as it once did. You say, healthcare's got problems, media's got problems, education's got problems. They were all created for a different society. They were all created for an industrial society, not a global digital information economy. And the task now is to move them. They have to be moved into the future. And that's going to happen in two kinds of ways, is the second observation I'd make. And the first one is, we can do it by repair, or we can do it by replacement. And both are going on simultaneously now. And we tend to do replacement more in the for-profit sector. And you can see the Huffington Post is now worth more than the Washington Post and the Boston Globe combined. In education and not-for-profits, we do repair. However, we're seeing more and more institutions begin to spring up, and more digital kinds of stuff spring up that's designed for replacement purposes. And there's also something, the reason the for-profit sector has more replacement than repair is if you get the right replacement, you can make a bundle. People are now seeing ways to make money on higher education. And it's not only the for-profits that are doing such terrible things to people. It's some very interesting and some very exciting ideas that are out there. Okay, what we're going to see is a multiplication of providers, not only different kinds of reforms. And the providers are going to be the businesses we've talked about, but they're going to be not-for-profits. We're going to see things like Teach for America, which is now spending 6 weeks preparing students to be teachers. There are going to be things like the Relay Graduate School of Education that just got created. Did you go to TFA? That Relay Graduate School of Education, independent graduate school of education that just sprung up in New York City. We're seeing those around the country. We're seeing school districts prepare teachers. We're seeing corporations prepare teachers, like the publisher I told you about. Everybody's getting into this business. Corporate universities are getting into this business big time. Another change that's going to happen as a consequence, I think, is that there's just going to be much more choice for people. Choose what you want to do, and there are going to be a gazillion ways to study it. You can study it in any of those places. But more importantly, you can study it in any number of formats. You'll be able to find things that you want to study 24/7. You'll be able to find things that are 2 weeks, a month, a year. They're going to be all different lengths that don't accord with semesters. And what's going to happen is that what I think we'll see is the old accounting system, the Carnegie unit, won't work as well as it once worked. And it was really, really good when it was time that mattered. What I think we're going to see is the format changes is, again, a greater emphasis on outcomes. And you took that 2-week program, what do you actually get out of it? What do you learn and what can you do now? What I think we're going to see as a consequence is a waning of the importance of degrees, a rise in the importance of competencies, lifelong transcripts recording the competencies we've achieved throughout a life, no matter where we've achieved them from, no matter what education we've taken. Okay. I can do one of two things. I can tell you what Woodrow Wilson's doing right now, or I can just take questions. What would you like? Or you can ask me questions about what Woodrow Wilson's doing. And I'm going to ask for a favor. I'm going to stop and do questions. But the favor I'm going to ask for is, if you ask a question, tell me who you are. I only know some of you. Well, that was easy.
Alan doesn't pretty much. What in fact is Woodrow Wilson doing? What's this deal you cooked up with MIT, which sounds amusing if it works?
Are there any other questions? What Woodrow Wilson did is, when I had written a whole series of reports about the condition of education schools in the United States. I'd written one on teacher education and one on school leadership and one on preparation of researchers. And I didn't think they'd come out the way they did. I originally started collecting data because I thought people were being overly critical of ed schools. And my data showed that they weren't. That the problems they were attributing to us, though not true of every institution, were real issues. And anybody can throw bricks. When I came to Woodrow Wilson, what I wanted was an opportunity to see if he can fix it. And so we chose 2 repair projects and 1 replacement project. Except what I call it is reimagining, reinventing rather than replacement. Replacement's just more alliterative. So that what happened is that in terms of repairs, we thought, what's the level at which you can have the maximum clout in terms of changing teacher education? And we concluded it's whole states. So we thought, okay, and we found one other thing. We found the highest need they had was for STEM teachers. And we found low-income schools particularly had need for those teachers and lots of vacancies. And we found that very small numbers of STEM teachers could make a huge difference. So in Michigan, preparing 120 a year we can fill every vacancy in Detroit, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Benton Harbor, Battle Creek, and Muskegon. And same thing's true. We're now in Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, New Jersey, and Georgia. And what the program does, we need to be invited by the governor to come do this program. And we form a coalition. It's the governor, the chief state school officer, the state higher education executive officer, legislators on both sides of the aisle, unions, schools, universities, philanthropy. And the reason we want all these people at the table is most innovations just die. Government person who funded it leaves. The university person who said, yeah, I'm going to do that, leaves. And you got nothing left. With this coalition, no matter who leaves, you just replace them in the coalition. Even if it's the governor, just replace them in the coalition. And it keeps going. The other thing is you have all the players at the table. So when a university says, yeah, we have this amazing idea, but the state won't let us do it. The state's sitting at the table and says, yeah, we will. We'll let you do that. So you can get all the business done in one place. Next thing we do is we recruit high ability people. They have STEM backgrounds. We tell them to take a one-year master's degree in teaching STEM. And we give them a $32,000 stipend. And they owe us 3 years teaching in high-needs schools in state when they're done. And actually, a surprise for us is after 3 years, we have an 81% retention rate, which I never expected. Next piece is we go to universities and we say, look, we want you to create the program the future requires. And we think you have the capacity to imagine it and to do it. No matter how good your program was, all those things I talked about have changed. And you need to create a new program to prepare STEM teachers for the future. And we're willing to invest in you. We want to see programs that focus on outcomes. We want them to be clinically based. People spend a full year in schools. We want them to be full-time in schools, 4 days first semester, 5 days second semester. We want university to adopt the school calendar. We want coursework to whatever extent possible to move into the schools. What we ask for on top of that is we ask that it be done with the school district that's being targeted. Say good they need, not what the university thinks they need. We also want arts and sciences and education to come together, so we get content as well as pedagogy. We want 3 years of mentoring once those people are in the classroom, and we want third-party evidence-based assessment, and for that we're using AIR. That program has high rewards, lots of incentives to go make the changes, and very high accountability. Next program is for school leaders, and that's in Indiana, New Mexico, and Wisconsin. And with that program, what we're saying is, and it's not true at AU, but in most universities around the country, their school leadership programs are terrible. They're just awful. What they are is a place for teachers to get salary bumps, not for people who want to be school leaders. At least that's what my research showed. More than half are coming for that reason. So the premiums on fast and easy, even at some very good universities. So we have been providing fellowships and incentives for universities to move their school leadership programs to the business school and bring together the ed school and the business school to create an MBA in school leadership. And we don't want a generic MBA. We want, if you're going to teach finance, we want it to be school finance. If you're going to teach strategic planning, we want it to be education strategic planning. The program also has a heavy, heavy clinical component. And it's a business-to-business model. You got to be nominated by a school district. And so if any of us want to apply, we can. What we're trying to do is build the pipeline in the district. And if a district nominates somebody and we're willing to accept that person, what happens is they have to have that person in a leadership position within a year of graduation or repay the fellowship. And the senior leadership of the district, the superintendent's office, has to agree to undergo advanced management, leadership, education. Send them all to IEM. So that what then happens is that we've just graduated our first class. I can't tell you anything about it yet. The universities we're working with in Indiana are Indiana University, Indiana State, University of Indianapolis, New Mexico. It's New Mexico State University, New Mexico. So we're pleased that we're getting some flagships who want to do this with us. Third program, which is actually the question you asked, but I need to put this into perspective. I think repair and replacement are both necessary now. I think repair is necessary because whatever we reinvent, whatever we reimagine, it's going to take years to scale up. And what's going to happen in the interim is 90% of the teachers and school leaders we have are still coming out of ed schools. Let's strengthen those programs to the greatest extent we possibly can. On the other hand, what we've said is we think the model's broken. It's not that ed schools did anything wrong. It's this condition I described before. The world changed. And we're living in an information economy. And the premium now is not how long you've been taught at, not how many credits you've taken, not how many hours you spent in class. The premium now is what did you learn? What can you do? What do you know? And so we're creating a competency-based, we're creating a graduate school of education that'll have we're creating an academy that'll have two components. One is a graduate school of education that only offers two programs, master's degrees in school leadership and teacher education. And the other is a laboratory. And so what we're going to offer is a competency-based program. It'll start with the STEM disciplines. The curriculum, you'll go through it. There's no amount of time that it's going to take you to go through it. If you're me, this could take years to go through this program. If it's some of the people in this room, you could finish this afternoon going through this program. Actually, we can't do that. It'll probably take you a month or so until we assess everything you got. But you'll move at the pace of what you know. You'll be assessed. You'll take what you don't know, not what you do know. We're building a curriculum which is all problem-based. But each problem incorporates a number of competencies. Too often competency-based curriculum, what happens is it forms a checklist. And here are 312 things you need to know. There's number 413. So that, check it off. And what we're saying is it doesn't work that way. They're intertwined and integrated. Let's create problem areas. They build a bunch of competencies together, and we'll assess how you're doing. The units will involve, there'll be traditional learning, there'll be games. Maybe the most exciting thing we're doing is we're trying to create a simulation of a classroom for people to teach in. It'll be a wonderful place to practice. It'll be a wonderful place to be assessed. It'll be a wonderful place for instruction. So every time you go into one of these problem areas, we'll hand you a problem. And probably somewhere midway through, we'll hand you a curveball. You just did classroom management? Bad news. You have a student coming in this afternoon who's been thrown out of 3 other classrooms and has a real behavioral problem. Okay, time to teach. What are you going to do? And we'll also have real clinical education that goes with it and assessment. The program we're doing with MIT, and we're doing with MIT for several reasons. One is we knew we were going to do it with the university because if we did this freestanding, every university in the United States could reject it and say, it's not like us. We're at a university. We want to do it at a university. And we wanted to do it at a university whose name mattered. And we didn't have time to come to you, so we went to them. And MIT offers us not only a world-class name, what they offer us is real strength in STEM. What they offer us is technology. What they offer us is game simulations, blended learning, edX, MITx, and a whole bunch of other things, which are wonderful. So MIT will serve as the incubator for this, and this will be the lab for MIT. The last pieces of this are that everything will be open source. We don't want this to be regarded as a competitor to any university. We want this regarded as, here's a resource center. Gee, we're all talking about competency. Why don't you come and take a look? See all the problems we had. See all the pit holes we stepped in. But take anything we have, it's yours. We also want is the lab I told you about. Imagine if you admit a class and a third looks like Teach for America, and a third looks like Career Changers, and a third looks like traditional ed school students. How long does it take them to get through the program? Do they get through the program? If they do get through the program, what student achievement look like in their classes? What can we say about retention in the profession? Okay. We don't much care about writing journal articles. Do you remember that coalition I described to you? Our goal is to get this stuff into the hands of policymakers. So what we're hoping for is, once upon a time, one of the governors in one of our states called up and said, I've got a bill on my desk, should I sign it or veto it? No more governors called with that question. But their staffs call, and higher education executives call, and their staffs, and commissioners of ed and their staffs, and legislators and their staffs. And what we really offer these guys is, we have no dog in the fight. So if you call us and you hate what we have to say, call us a name, hang up, and don't ever mention it, don't do anything. If you like what we say, you can take it and say it's your own idea. We don't care. So for that reason, we've gotten involved in every state we're in terms of policy. Take that study we just did. Let's get into the hands of policymakers who are making policy without looking at research, without understanding what works. So when we think about this thing, our aspiration, and you remember aspirations are dramatically higher than realities. We want to create the West Point of education in terms of preparing a profession. And we want to create the equivalent of Google or Bell Labs in terms of R&D and research and education. And that's all. Please.
Excuse me, I'm Jason Ayer. I'm the Director of Communication Marketing here at Specs. If the primary outcome now is, what did you learn or gaining competencies, how does that affect assessment and testing?
Oh, they're going to have to change. I think that testing is going to change in big ways anyway, which is the current testing system, whether we're talking about final exams or we're talking about the tests in schools, they're all too late. Imagine if your GPS worked the way the tests work. Okay, so every hour it would give you a reading. And it would say, when you started out, you know this, you were 20 miles away. Your GPS now announces you're 50 miles away, and you're going in the wrong direction, recalculating. That's useless. We want it just in time. I want to know when I've turned incorrectly. Testing's going to become more and more like that. Working with us, I can see where you just stepped off the path, where you made the wrong turn. I'm going to give you some more material. I'm going to send the teacher over to work with you. I'm going to do any of a number of things, but it's going to be adaptive. And what I think testing is going to become is formative, 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 and that last formative is actually summative, which is you've gotten through all of it, and you've shown that you can do all of it. And that's going to be really useful. So that assessment has got to change. And it's not the kind of thing we're talking about in teacher education. Most of it's performance-based. And in terms of competencies, what we're having to do is develop a whole new assessment system. And the first class we admit is going to be very small and free. Because all of this is new. We have no idea whether it works. We want to take a class of, well, they're not guinea pigs, they'll get a degree. We'll take them through, and we want to understand how this works. We want to understand what's good and what's bad about all this. We had, when we work with universities to try to change programs, it takes 5 years to get it right. 2 years of planning. First year, you create a beta, and it needs a lot of change. Second year, it's serious tweaking. third year, you're where you wanted to be in the first year. But it takes that long to get it right. We expect the same thing will be true of us. I hope it only takes 3 years to get it right. I hope we get it right. Please.
Sarah Belson, I'm the faculty member at the School of Ed. So I have a question for you, and maybe you can help me understand.
Oh, that's dangerous.
It was in 1999, like when most of these people were still in high school, at least Corolla. The National Council for Accreditation of Teacher Education came up with this long-term competency model, right? That where universities or other teacher prep organizations had to work with school systems. They had to partner with school systems, just like you're talking about what you're doing. And this continuous improvement model was designed so that universities had these relationships with school systems for 5 years. But that went away when we all of a sudden had all these other competitors, all these other people playing in the field, particularly here in DC, where we struggled with the fact that our former chancellor was concerned that the teacher prep programs couldn't produce teachers fast. And so here's where I find the challenge is, if we do this well, it takes time to develop a teacher. It takes that clinical work that is so powerful. But we've got all this pressure from the other providers to do it faster. So how are you guys going to solve that challenge?
That's an excellent question, just an excellent question. And I'm sure other people have excellent questions. Let me just take a crack at that and say that what we're going to do is this. Let me go back to the Accrediting Association and say that we did a study of the Accrediting Association while I was doing my study of ed schools. And it turns out that the institutions they've accredited, if you just look at the U.S. News and World Report list in the day of NCATE, which was the Accrediting Association for Teacher Education, it turns out a higher proportion of the institutions in the bottom decile were accredited than the top decile. It also turns out that there's no difference in terms of performance of teachers who graduate from either an accredited or non-accredited school, and in some subject areas, they do worse. So I wasn't real high on that. And I remember the worst teacher education program I've ever seen was accredited. So I went to head of NCATE at that time, and I said, this is the worst school I've ever seen. And he said, yeah, we know that. It's not going to get accredited again. It was up for accreditation. It got reaccredited. And I went to see him and I said, what happened? He said, oh, they've changed dramatically. This place did not change dramatically. Standards were low. They promulgated lots of standards and didn't do it. In terms of getting things done, government has a schizophrenic policy about education. In order to get more teachers, they're creating all kinds of alternative pathways that move people through faster. In order to get better teachers, they're raising standards for people coming through traditional paths. So you have both these things, which each one makes sense alone, perhaps, but together they make no sense. That's a real problem. What are we going to do? What I'm hoping, I think one of the failures of those of us who've worked in ed schools, and I spent a lot of my life in them, is I went to a meeting of the AAU ed school deans, and I was giving them a talk. And the guy before me, or the woman before me, I can't remember who it was anymore, said, you know what our problem is? Our problem is we lack the rhetoric to explain what it is we're doing. We've got a failure of communication. Didn't work in Cool Hand Luke, and it's not working for us. So that I said, I've been in this field for a long time, and I've heard this since the beginning, and we are pretty articulate people. If there were some words we could have said, don't you think we would have thought of them? Why do you think Teach for America is gaining this huge reputation around the country? And we're not. And part of the reason is they have data. Whether you like the data, don't like the data, think the data is cooked. They have data. And we have anecdotes. We had a student who came to our school and had this teacher. 3 of her parents were in jail and the other 4 were dead. And last week in 5th grade, she won the Nobel Prize in Physics because of the quality of our teachers. You can't do that anymore. It doesn't work. No policymaker is willing to accept those kinds of stories anymore. And what it means is we need hard data. If you can prove that giving that extra clinical experience does two things. One, it causes greater retention, which saves money, and two, it produces higher achievement. That's a really interesting thing. I just saw a study which showed dramatic differences in student achievement according to the age in which teachers enter the profession. And that was fascinating to me, and I can't tell you any more than that. But dramatic. That kind of data is worth something. If we did more of that, I think we'd have a better shot. Please.
Hi, I'm a retired teacher from this area, Kathy Poblaser. I taught at a school that a lot of these people will know, Thomas Jefferson.
Sure.
Yeah, which is really terrific. And I guess what I get concerned is, that during OneSpace, for 4 years, we were the #1 high school in America. Now, I've taught at lots of different schools, and we were not the #1 high school. We had really terrific, wonderful kids, and I'm not saying anything disparaging about my school. Please don't take that from my comments. But when you look at the data they used, of course, we had great test takers. We only took the test takers. So if that becomes a real, determinant of the best schools. Now, sometimes as a department chair, I went into classrooms and I saw not the best lessons. Ted Sizer said, in every school in America, if you could have one good lesson a week, you're doing well, even in the most prestigious schools. So we had terrific teachers, good school, but I worry about when you say we have to produce data now, particularly in the public sector and other sectors like AU that wants to compete with other schools. I worry about people being wise about what data really means. What is the best school in America? I think there's a really terrific school in America that could beat TJ because they bring kids up. And that's sometimes a much harder task than just managing super bright kids, which I found challenging and wonderful.
But the question is, how do you know? And I think the real problem for us is this, that education for the most part, let me see if I can think of something that's analogous. Imagine if they were promulgating new laws for medicine and they didn't ask any doctors. And all doctors did was complain that government was creating these new rules. That would never happen. They're viewed as the experts in their field, and that's who they go to. And what education has done, we bitch a lot. What we say is, you've created all these measures, and we don't think they're reasonable. Then create different ones. Validate them. I mean, that's what we need, and I don't know why we haven't done it. Tell us what measures we ought to be using. There's a wonderful, I really enjoyed this book. Tony Wagner has just written a new book. And I really enjoyed it. And what he said is, listen, if we taught education, if we had schools, and what we want to do is teach people how to ride bikes. So we'd start them off taking courses on the physics of bike riding. And then what we'd do is we'd give them tests on the parts of a bicycle. And then what we'd do is we'd take them through and we'd ask them about the history of the bicycle. And then what we'd do is we would give an award to the person who got the highest grades on all of these tests. We wouldn't have them actually ride a bicycle. And that's the real danger, which is we're doing the wrong things, we're measuring the wrong things, and we don't do anything to create an alternative to it. One of the problems we're having now is I really favor data. I mean, that should be obvious. I don't favor any data. I favor, it's GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, in terms of data. And I favor the efforts on the part of government to push for data. The problem is they don't have the data. So in Indiana, for example, where we're doing our work, we wanted to test data. Well, it turns out they don't test in Algebra 2. It turns out they don't test in chemistry, physics, or earth science. It turns out they don't test in, and that's a lot of STEM stuff they're not testing in. Beyond that, what happens is you can't really use rural schools because their classes are too small for VAM scores. It's got to have at least 7 people. And you can't really use advanced courses because they're also really small in some urban schools. So you're left with ridiculously small ends and very limited subject matters. You can't ask people to use that data unless you have the data to be able to use it. I thank you very, very much. Let me just not leave on a negative note. The one thing that's really exciting is there's probably no generation in modern times that's had the chance to put its mark on the future of education, to shape tomorrow that we have today, and particularly the students in the audience. You're going to have full careers in creating this world. It's an extraordinary, exciting opportunity, an incredible responsibility, and you're going to do amazing things. Now, thank you very much.